I am the envy of my peers around the country because people are convinced we have some secret juju juice on retail because some of the best brands in the world, including some of them sitting at this table, have been founded in Seattle. And so today, that is the goal of my questions, is I want to find out what that secret juice is, and so how we can keep doing it into the future.
West Coast, Pacific Rim, it's where the United States had to quit growing, or they'd fall in the water. So I think a lot of people that had adventure in their mind and looking for new things worked their way across this country. And I think the fact that we're a young city, it's attractive to young people, and that's been a constant part of our growth and obviously a big part of our success. My grandpa, who came from Sweden, worked on a farm, his family's farm, up in almost inside the Arctic Circle. So he comes to this country when he was 15 years old. He couldn't speak a word of English. He'd never gone to school. Here he comes, and with no money. He worked as a logger and anything to make a buck, and then finally to support his family. So the first store is a little store on First Avenue, $11 receipts, income the first day, sales. Hard to imagine how he then grasped this idea of service.
I think the main thing in our family is just kind of a conservatism. The other part to it is the financial part. That we have a story in our company that when my grandfather bought his first store, I mean, he was 20 years old. So his father came out from Kansas, found out that my grandfather owed some money on this store. And the story is that his dad paid it off and said, "Don't get into debt again." And, we haven't strictly done that, but basically we've definitely tried to live within our means.
Somebody told the young Americans, Midwest, to come west, I guess it was. Somebody told my father and the people from Japan to go east. So. And my father was told there's always a dishwashing job for you from somebody from the village that he came from or something like that. And then my father said with the first boat, there was about a 14-day from Yokohama to Seattle, and then it was another day to San Francisco. He said he was so seasick he just jumped ship. But that's the reason. But also, Seattle was a very popular place for people from Japan, probably because of the fact that it was a one-day shorter trip. I think its desire was to be successful, make money, and go back to Japan. So we were just told to work very hard and save as much money. And to do that, he said, you got to treat your customers very well so that they will come back. And that was one of the reasons I feel that we have survived this long.
I worked downtown for years and years and years. We had some rough innings just because of the onslaught of these suburban stores. When finally Fredericks had to close, here's this big, beautiful building on a whole block right in the middle of downtown. In the meantime, we're over there operating across the street, and it's funny, 3 separate buildings, and they were different levels, and it was a difficult building really to work with. Well, first of all, it cost us about 3 times more than we thought it would cost us. And second of all, we did about 4 times more business than we thought we would. So, it worked. I mean, we rolled the dice and did. But the fact that we occupy that wonderful building now, I feel really good about it.
In the 60s, my father really wanted to be part of the World's Fair. And so he said, Tomio, you put together the store. Well, anyway, we found out during the fair that many of the customers naturally were not Japanese. And so our products were being accepted by a larger population. So that was one of the things that spurred us on. My father really didn't think our business would grow because he was convinced that the next generations would be eating hamburger and not rice. A couple things that happened that changed that. First of all, before World War II, no one heard of Seattle, but after World War II, probably more and more people, because of the military people that went to Japan, Korea, and Vietnam, came back and were more used to Asian foods. That helped. The other thing is, right after World War II, probably over 100,000 Japanese war brides came to the United States. A good percentage landed in the Seattle area because of our military, and they have been very wonderful customers. I was at Boeing working on the Minuteman when my father passed away. As I told you, he didn't think the business was going to grow, and so when he passed away, my mother was working so hard, I came back to help. And I thought, well, for 2-3 years I'll help and then kind of move on. But that didn't happen. Yeah. But anyway, in 2009, my kid sister took over. But, you know, the next generation will be interesting. My parents had 19 grandchildren. About 6 or 7 work at the company. We asked of the approximately 30 next generation who would be interested. 17 stepped forward and were willing to take the assessment and be interviewed. And of that, we have identified 8 as a possible CEO.
Mr. Best and his wife had this fabulous specialty store in women's apparel at the corner of 5th and Pine. They were getting older. They wanted out. And so we bought that store. And Lloyd, my uncle, made me the president. I said, okay, now what do I do? And so he says, go back to New York for a couple of weeks and talk to all the vendors and go look at all, you know, Bergdorf Goodman's and Saks and all these nice stores and see how they're doing. And then I came back and I wandered around in the store. And on the second floor, it was their salon. It was their fine dress department. And there wasn't one garment on the floor. The walls were all covered with a velvet, like curtains. And there in the middle of the room was a little straight chair like one of these that you're sitting in. And here is this woman sitting there with her hair in a bun and a pencil stuck in her hair. And I said, I'd like to look at some merchandise. She said, well, if you tell me what you want, and then we will take you into the back room and present it to you. That was my first directive. Was I got back up to my office, I said, from now on in, the stuff will all be out on the floor where we can see it, or the customer can see it. And you know, it's this common sense that you guys are talking about is what it really is. And it gave us the opportunity, we got our foot in the door to combine the apparel and the shoes, and we ended up with the largest store of its kind that there is.
We've only had 2 transitions in leadership in 120 odd years. Every time you have a transition in leadership, particularly in a family business, I think there's a big risk that it's just not going to work. We've always kind of tried to stick to the values of my grandfather and not gotten ahead of ourselves, or at least we've tried not to get ahead of ourselves. And I think today our values are very similar, if not the same as his values in which he founded the company.
I came from Omaha, Nebraska, so my friends went east and I went west. And the interesting thing about this area is that we have less traditions to support. So there was a period where you weren't trying to keep up with the tradition of the past. You could do whatever you wanted. In the early 80s, there was a book called The Nordstrom Way, and I think it may have done more for Seattle than anything in defining that we were doing something different than you couldn't get service in New York in the early 80s. You couldn't get it anywhere. It was just, we had people who were not servicing customers. They were in the country. They were mostly just defending merchandise. So I think the Nordstrom Way put Seattle on the map.
Fortunately in Seattle, because we have these businesses that were started here and raised here, the culture is here. That culture just grows on itself. We have over 60,000 employees. And that culture has been able to grow, and it's what I'm the most proud of on my watch.
A lot of it is sticking to your values. I think part of it is, hiring people for the right attitude too. It kind of goes back to the earlier question. It's one thing we try to do is when someone asks me, would I rather hire someone with experience or hire someone with a really good attitude and personality? I want the personality. We can train them how to do the rest of the stuff.
Yeah.
I think the other major piece was that as the baby boom went through the 60s and got very, very strong, they were very adventuresome, so that a lot of our retail culture was built on the ability to maximize the baby boom's growth through their age groups. If you remember, the Bond had the Tiger Shop and Cube, and those were the largest junior operations in the country for years. People in high school started shopping, and then it just kept moving through. And so I think part of it is the culture of not having to defend a tradition, and the second is the idea that the adventuresome group here that came out in retail found the niche of where they could sell something, and they just kept selling it.
The Japanese Asian tradition has always been to treat your customers very well. The service it's just a long hundreds of years of tradition, and so I don't think our parents told us to treat people well. That was just a tradition.
We're shoe dogs. We get on our hands and knees in front of a customer because that's how you wait on them. And I think that's pretty good posture to get into if they're going to give you their money.
When you already have some of these iconic brands and they're doing such a good job at customer service, it's kind of hard to compete unless you try to provide the same or better.
I also want to add Mohai's thanks to the panelists. Thank you, Kate, and thank you, Phyllis Lamphere, for inspiring us to really understand the history that we're making today, because that is our future.